Thank you so much. Thanks, Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Joshua Dankoff. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at Citizens for Juvenile Justice, which is a Massachusetts nonprofit organization working in the juvenile justice and child welfare space broadly, where we think about birth to 25 as our age. So we think a lot about young adults in the adult justice system in Massachusetts. In the 10 years at CfJJ, I have written over 15 reports on a range of subjects, 3 of which I'll talk about in subject today. But a lot of what we've done in thinking in the last 6-8 years is kind of to compare what's happening for 16, 17, also 18 to 20-year-olds who are at Department of Youth Services, and what's happening with similarly situated 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds who are in the adult correctional system, or adult court system broadly, but for our discussion today, correctional system. So that's what my discussion will be about. Talk about education, talk about health, talk about GPS monitors and community supervision, and then a little bit about where one area where there's maybe over cooperation. I'll just leave that as a teaser for the end. My takeaway message today is that I think, and Citizens for Juvenile Justice believes that raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction to include 18 to 20-year-olds in juvenile courts is the most cost-efficient way to ensure that this emerging adult population that is currently being managed in the adult system can receive developmentally appropriate services and also have the best public safety outcomes. Both as we've talked about, both adult and DYS populations have reduced significantly over the last 15 years, but DYS spending has been flat and the adult spending has gone up. And at the same time, we know that DYS has the capacity, infrastructure, and is already in custody of almost half of their committed population. DYS is in this 18 to 20-year-old age range. So when you say DYS doesn't know what they're doing with 18 to 20-year-olds, that's just not true. They already are working with this population.
Working with and results driven are 2 different things. I want to see the statistics. I want to see them.
Correct.
Working with them.
DYS has a recidivism report that they put out every year.
I hear you. I'm just saying, you made a very strong point. I hear you. They're working with them. I want to see the results-based, evidence-based statistical data.
Great. I will look forward to providing what data I can.
Thank you.
This area. While I think there has been some attention and, dare I say, hype around the emerging adult units in the adult system now, I think it's important to note that, and there have been in those units improved programming and practices in a small number of houses of correction. I didn't think it was 7. You mentioned that earlier. I count as 3, although there are some emerging adult programming in more than those 3. At the same time, in the places, in the houses of correction and in the DOC, even the ones that have emerging adult units, it's only a small percentage of the 18 to 20-year-olds or 18 to 24-year-olds who are at the house of correction that are in those units. And if you, at a recent visit to one, there were 20 young people in the emerging adult unit. Out of 80 or 85 people of that population were in the count. And almost half of the remaining 80 were in restricted housing.
You know why? Because they're gang members, Josh, and they're fighting and they're stabbing.
So
okay, so before you get accusatory, before you get accusatory, understand that your answer.
All right, hold on a second, Sheriff. You know what? Here's what we can do, right? Let witnesses testify. Let witnesses testify, and then we have time to speak to. We have our platform.
There are gang members also, or alleged or actual gang members across youth service systems, including DYS. And wow, just to say that the adult units have people spending 22 hours a day or more in restricted housing. That's not developmentally appropriate. That's not going to lead to good public safety outcomes. And that's not going to lead to things that we all want for the young people in our Commonwealth. It's not really a good way to seek accountability either. We have in Massachusetts a Department of Youth Services system that does achieve better public safety outcomes in the adult system. And we can, and as you think about your charge around consolidation, to think about ways to be most cost effective, my argument is the most cost effective way to deal with the young adult population would be to use the system that you already have here in Massachusetts, which is the Department of Youth Services system, instead of recreating at much greater cost the emerging adult unit across the House of Correction and Department of Corrections. So, on education, in 2022, CfJJ wrote a report called Schools Out that documented the education and especially special education services available to emerging adults, 18 to 21-year-olds in the adult system. And we basically found that the adult system is structurally unable to meet the legal requirements and to provide education for our 18 to 21-year-old young people. If you have an IEP in place and you have special education and you qualify for special education services, those the requirements go until you receive a high school diploma or you reach the age of 22.
Are you saying that's not available?
That is not available in the Houses of Correction or DOC, and to a large extent. The data that we found in the report found that under 10% of the 18 to 21-year-olds actually received special education services. And at Department of Youth Services, we know that similarly situated young people, the rate of identification of those who have IEPs in place is closer to 50%. So there's a very large under-identification of young people who have special education needs in the House of Correction, and at DOC as well. The numbers are even worse at DOC, depending on their response to public records requests. Between 2 and 12 young people over the course of 5 years actually receive special education services overall. Now, the law makes clear that DESE shall provide special education to young people 18 to 21 years old at the House of Correction, and there's currently litigation pending against DESE for their poor ability to do that. At the same time, it's really important to note that the House of Correction and DOC have a role in identifying which young people have an IEP in place or are in need of an IEP, and that identification role is driving DESE's low number of teachers, and it's driving the failure in the system.
But doesn't DESE do contract services in most jurisdictions to provide those services?
Yeah, DESE has one contract statewide that covers Department of Youth Services, Department of the House of Correction, DPH, and DMH. The issue is that they were only going to provide the number of teachers to the House of Correction based on the students who are identified. So and they leave it in their regs, which I think is inappropriate, but they leave it in their regs to the House of Correction to identify young people who have an IEP in place. And that's where the identification rates are so low that the number of teachers then that DESE provides is inadequate to meet this unmet need. So it's not all on you for sure. The system overall is failing these young people. I think it's also important to note this goes across for general education, K-12 education as well. There was some discussion earlier of HISET, and that's an important role, but for the most part, and actually I'm sorry that Chair Kochi stepped out, because in Hampton House of Correction, that's actually one place where it's probably the easiest place to receive a high school diploma in the Commonwealth at a House of Correction. Most of the House of Correction do not have the relationships with school districts, and there's a lot more that can be done to make sure that if a young person actually wants to complete their high school degree and not just go for HISET, that they can do that
I've got to ask where this information is coming from, probably for the same reason Nick was looking at it, because that hasn't been our experience on the sheriff's side, from the sheriff's department side. I've spoken with and worked with and working with DESE. So.
Sure. Public records requests to the sheriff's agency is in terms of the scope and quality and type of educational programs available, as well as discussions with most of the director of education directors at the sheriff's departments. That's the source. I will admit that the report was 2022 from the data, but from the data that I've seen up to a couple of months ago, the number of young people receiving special education services in the House of Correction remains under 20 statewide, whereas the need is more likely at 150. So there's still a large gap between the need and what's happening.
Is it possible you can share that research with us?
Absolutely. I make reference to it in the, I'll submit this, I've already submitted a written testimony here, but I'm happy to provide any additional information. Just a quick note, and this was mentioned before, educational programming is really an important best practice in terms of public safety, in terms of positive outcomes. Given the K2 epidemic that was already discussed, and the mental, which is really also linked to the mental health crisis, I just want to draw this committee's attention to the need to expand educational programming. And there's a group at Norfolk, the Norfolk Inmate Council, that recently wrote a very powerful report last month entitled "The Genesis of Substance Use Disorders in Custody," with suggestions moving forward. I just want to recommend that the Commission take a look at that. It's fine for me as an active person on the outside to make my suggestions, but it's important to also listen to those inside. Second, I just want to talk about and there's a bill, you asked about bills, an act to ensure educational rights are upheld for incarcerated youth, House 620, Senate 1721, would ensure that anyone aged 18 to 21 who is at a House of Corrections or DOC is in school 6 hours a day, year-round, importantly, regardless of classification and regardless of disciplinary status. This is actually just pulling the DYS educational system and replicating it, if the state is not ready to raise the age, to replicate the educational system there. On the healthcare side, earlier this year, CfJJ put out a report called Just Healthcare, which is an overview and analysis of healthcare delivery in the Department of Youth Services. But there's an important here to talk about the comparison here that we have between the House of Correction, or it's really between the Department of Corrections, healthcare, and what's happening at DYS. So first of all, just in terms of a standard of care, Department of Youth Services uses a community standard of care, makes reference to the Bright Futures standard from the American Academy of Pediatricians. This is kind of top of the line. While DOC also, in their most recent RFR for healthcare provision, does make reference to a community standard, if you read the footnote, they define community standard only to mean the community is just interpreted in light of a prison system environment, and they basically define the community as other people who are imprisoned. So doesn't seem like their definition of community is my understanding of the community, which is the same type of healthcare that one would get if you're not incarcerated, and it seems like a misuse of that term. DYS contracts with nonprofit providers, including Boston Children's, UMass Medical. DOC has a contract with a for-profit agency. It's not necessarily, well, I'll just say that. And DYS, the state has keeps young people at DYS on mass health, even without a reimbursement for Medicaid. It's a fabulous policy that Massachusetts does, and when I mention that to people out of state, they're shocked, and it just sort of shows what is possible, and the type of care that young people would get were they at DYS. My recommendation would be that young adults need development to appropriate health care, which is something that's available and already provided at DYS. And the Commission should recommend to the legislature, again, to raise the age of juvenile jurisdiction to include 18 to 20-year-olds to take advantage of the healthcare system there. Third of four, halfway there. I think that it's important to note that there's broadly an over-reliance on facility-based custody when there are community-level supervision options that are both most cost-efficient and less harmful, and can still keep in mind the accountability that may be important in these systems. So Probably the most cost-efficient way would be to transition individuals safely back to community settings using the least restrictive method appropriate. CfJJ recently put out a report entitled E-Carceration, which focuses on the use of GPS monitors across the juvenile and adult systems. The majority of that is in probation pretrial and probation receive, although about half of the sheriff's departments and the DOC and DYS and parole all have GPS programs available. This sort of fits into the question that came up earlier in terms of overclassification. And one note that while I think it was 15 or 18% of people at DOC are classified as in maximum security facilities, when you bring that down to 18 to 21-year-olds, it's 50%. 31 out of 63 18 to 21-year-olds at DOC were at Susan Baranowski. And again, this data is a couple of years old. This is the most recent data that I have. And that we should really just look, if you think about what you were doing when you were 18 to 21-year-old, or what your children, or what you want them to be doing, pretty sure you don't want it to be spending 22 hours a day without personal interactions, regardless of if a person may be a member of a gang. The recommendation here, I think, would be to expand community supervision through accurate classifications and using GPS, but only really when necessary. So the Commission should consider recommending expansion of the use of individualized classification assessments that can safely class people down, especially young adults, from the secure custody to community level supervision. Again, if you look at what's happening at DYS, we have a critique of what's going on there, but DYS, when a young person is committed to DYS, it's within DYS's legal authority to place them in a secure setting, in a group home setting, or even in the community. And they do that. And they do that in a way that has been quite successful. So a note of caution, you don't want to overuse GPS. It's not just like, it shouldn't be just a norm that if someone is coming out into the community that they should be on GPS. And our report goes into some of the challenges and concerns we have around kind of just normalizing GPS. That's certainly the case on the parole side that we have some concerns with. Okay, and finally, the example that I have of too much collaboration is between DOC, the House of Corrections, and their current relationships with the federal immigration authorities. So we know now that sheriff departments are regularly sharing daily intake logs with ICE of people who are coming to their custody. This is generally at ICE's request.
Not all sheriff's offices are doing that.
Not all, I would say most. I wish that the sheriff's departments had responded more positively to my public records request to more consistently, but the large majority of them are. And I've seen some of the ones that have shared information. You have requests for daily logs, and then, yep, here it is. And not just that, there's also letting people know, not just at the end of their sentence, but pre-trial, if someone is coming up for bail, telling ICE that this person is going to court and is going to be released, and letting ICE know that they're going to be there. This is a level of collaboration that goes well beyond information that's publicly available, and includes sharing of information that is absolutely not required by Massachusetts law. One sheriff said that, told me that he was following the governor's lead in terms of the information sharing with ICE. This is in reference to the current 287G agreement between Massachusetts Department of Correction and ICE, and that he would welcome statutory restrictions on what information sheriff departments can send to federal immigration authorities. What's happening now in terms of this information sharing it really undermines some of the core principles of both the juvenile and criminal legal systems, namely a presumption of innocence, due process, an opportunity to defend oneself against allegations, a right to an attorney, among other things. While the immigration system kind of claims to be civil in nature, the current federal administration has criminalized and militarized the immigration system such that the real-world consequences for the civil system is more akin to a criminal violation: arrest, detention, often far away from family and community, and the possibility of deportation. So if we have faith in our own systems, in our own state's legal system, then we should allow our legal processes to run their course and not allow our local and state level actors, including police, prosecutors, and in this case, the sheriff's departments, to alert ICE to the whereabouts of individuals who may be undocumented, which can and does lead to their detention. We have a state level criminal and juvenile justice system, and these systems are being co-opted and short-circuited by federal immigration policies, including through the permissive policies at the police level, sheriff's department, as well as the trial court. Finally, I just want to say there is a legal and financial risk to the DOC and sheriffs collaborating with ICE. Bristol County Sheriff just last month settled a lawsuit for about $1 million that stemmed from misconduct from its employees during the sheriff's department's earlier policies housing ICE detainees. And it's important to note in this, neither the state nor the federal government indemnified the sheriff department or its employees were sued in their individual capacities in that nature. So given the number of US citizens who have been wrongly detained and some even deported by ICE, sheriffs and the DOC are really putting their own agencies at legal risk by collaborating and sharing information with ICE that could lead to future lawsuits. Just be aware of what's going on.
I'll even have to say, I believe the sheriff's offices are fully aware of what's going on, and they are acting within the scope of what the Lund decision directed them to do, which was a decision by the state Supreme Court.
Sure. I'm not suggesting here that the sheriffs are violating Lund, but I think it is an important thing to just think about whether our local and county and state systems implicated in what's happening nationally right now. And just because you're not violating Lund doesn't mean you're doing the right thing.
Okay. Thank you for that testimony. Any questions from members of the commission? Sir.
If I might, Josh, good to see you. And so let me start by saying the point about addressing appropriately the 18 to 20-year-old population, I agree with the need to come up with a different way of doing that. Let me ask you, what are the numbers? How many in that group are at DYS and how many are at DOC, you know?
Right now, I don't know the most recent. I mean, DOC numbers are relatively small because to get to DOC, you need to have been charged as an adult and then go through the process and then be sentenced. As of 2 years ago, it was about 60. Again, a couple of years ago, on all of the House of Correction, it was about 350. But again, there is better data than there was.
Okay,
on the DYS side, how many 18 to 21-year-olds? Or 18 to 20-year-olds, I guess and say 200.
200.
That's my guess.
What I worry about, and I'll tell you, years ago, there was a governor's anti-crime commission. And they had asked the DYS commissioner to come and explain why his numbers had grown so much. And he came in with charts and graphs and explanations. And the Chief Justice of the Juvenile Court cut him off and said, it has nothing to do with any of that. He said, we like what you're doing. So I worry about what that might mean in terms of the numbers and the growth in that population. And how do you avoid the tail wagging the dog if you move in that direction?
Yeah. Well, first let me just say there's an annex to my written testimony that has an analysis that we did that basically says that if raise the age 18 had passed, that DYS could handle that capacity, and that would just bring them back to 2018 numbers. But since the capacity has gone down, that they could do that. That's an interesting question, and one that has come up in terms of DYS, in terms of in terms of other state agencies as well. I'll just say that. Again, it's within DYS's legal authority to place young people as appropriate, and they treat that seriously, and If raise the age were to happen, it would again be juvenile court judges who are familiar with GYS and their programming model and their treatment model would be taking on those cases. So it's actually not something I'm terribly worried about.
So just to put a final point on it, so I do think there are judges who say, I'm reluctant to send this individual to DOC,
Yeah.
knowing the system.
Yeah.
If they say, wait a minute, I've got a better option at DYS and I'd like to have this kid off the street, they'll send them there. And I do think that that growth in numbers all of a sudden becomes DYS's real focus to be able to manage that population appropriately.
The implementation would take some thoughtful execution for sure.
And a lot of resources, would you agree?
I mean, it would take some resources, but it would also be a shift of resources away from a current system that is okay, not educating adequately, and not providing adequate health care, and being okay with.
At that point, I'm not disagreeing with you,
Sure.
but, okay.
So sure, it would be, in my mind, it would be a shift of resources from the adult system towards the juvenile system, not necessarily increasing resources.
Okay.
What percentage of capacity is DYS at the present time?
I don't know.
Because that comes into play in that situation too. If you all of a sudden put DYS at 80%, do you create a problematic atmosphere, or even let's say 90%? Those of us who have lived through cycles of high incarceration rates understand what problematic pieces come about when you start to pack everybody into small spaces.
Sure. I mean, I know that there are some units that are fully empty at DYS, so they might need to contract out to fill those units and staff those units, but I do know that there's some capacity.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for your written testimony as well, which we'll all have access to.